Hello, and welcome to the Overly Animated Podcast, where we take animation seriously. We talk everything animation here, including Steven Universe Future, which we'll be getting into tonight. I'm your host, Alex Bonilla, and today I'm joined by Michelle Andrew.
Hello.
And Maddie Potter.
Hello.
Tonight we are discussing the latest two episodes of Steven Universe, Together Forever and Growing Pains. If you want to catch our previous Steven Universe Future coverage, including our thoughts on last week's episodes in Dreams and Bismuth Casual, you can find that at overlyanimated.com. You can find us on YouTube at youtube.com/overlyanimated, or on wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find us at Overly Animated. But tonight we are going to talk about Together Forever and Growing Pains. This one we're doing a bit more in the immediate. It's they finished up at 7:30. We're here beginning our recording at 7:35, so our thoughts will be very fresh. So we'll begin with initial impressions from these two episodes. Let's go to you, Michelle, first. So what are your feelings after these two episodes?
Okay, so it was pretty unanimous between all of us that we expected Together Forever to be the hard, trashy, not trash, but just like trash fire of emotions.
Sure.
Episode. And Growing Pains, I don't know. I thought maybe Steven would turn into Wormy. That's a form of growing. That's not what happened.
Wormy.
Growing Pains just. Oh my god, I can't even with that. And Together Forever was surprisingly not as bad as I thought by a long shot. Though I guess Growing Pains is kind of like the back end, which shows that it's actually kind of worse than once it started festering on Steven, it got worse. But oh my god, I haven't wanted to cry at Steven in a while. This was the first time in Future that I was pretty close to tears. I might have cried a little bit, just because, when Greg came in, it was just so much, and I don't feel good at all. I know I kept saying, yeah, let's get to rock bottom, but also, if we're getting close, I don't want it like this. I don't want this. This is too painful. And just all the flashbacks from episodes, and the, was there any childhood, traumatic situation? It's yo, girl. Which one? I just feel really shook. I'm kind of emotionally exhausted. Ask Maddie something now.
Okay.
Well, so that's a summary of your initial impressions. Emotionally exhausted. That's a good two-word.
On this podcast, are we allowed to pass it off whenever we're done with therapy for a bit?
Yeah.
Sure.
If this was in person, we'd be passing around a literal microphone. So think of it that way.
Or a talking stick.
Yeah. But, so Michelle wants to pass it over to Maddie. So, Maddie, give us your initial thoughts on these two episodes overall.
I am not going to start out as hot as I could. Long story short, these are difficult episodes. These go in a direction I was not expecting. Not because I didn't see the evidence for this in the show. I wasn't expecting it to be this explicit about a lot of the stuff that Steven's gone through. This is now clearly a very, very strong allegory to childhood abuse. Yeah, that's a lot to take in. And they just use a lot of language that a lot of therapists and books about childhood abuse use and talk about when talking about Steven's feelings and when he's talking to his dad. And these episodes are hard. They're difficult. Mm-hmm. And even Together Forever, it's it's difficult. Because even when it's the stakes are a lot lower there, but even then, I could feel it beginning to fester there, reaching a boiling point with Steven in that episode. And so there's this double whammy of, oh God, Steven, no. And also, oh God, Steven, no.
It's a good summary.
Yeah, at the same time. And I don't know, like, where to start. I mean, I know where I want to start, but it's at the very end, and we're not going to start there quite yet.
Sure. Okay,
How do you feel, Alex?
I'll tell you that these are some of the most amazing episodes of Steven Universe I've ever watched. I'm shocked at like how clearly it brings up situations that you'd bring up in therapy. Like with children's shows, often we talk about how messages that they want to get across have to be buried in so much allegory that it takes a bit to dig them out. Here, like, we're using words like cortisol and trauma, and like we're just really like laying it out as like a norm, like make it easy to understand for all ages about how this works with people. And I love this show for that it decides to be this clear while using the animation to express it in a new way. In this case, we're using Steven like changing colors and sizes to reflect how the trauma is affecting him. So it's a combination of taking advantage of the animation while also like being like in your face about what we're actually talking about here. So I really am in awe of these episodes. And like it also like the fact that these two episodes are paired together, that we didn't have to wait a week in between is also very good, because like you can see the clear through line, like how in the moment you'd handle something with enough grace that you feel like when I watched Together Forever, that when that first 11 minutes ended, I was like, wow, that didn't turn out as bad as I thought it would. Like you got the sense like, wow, like both sides handled this okay, and you feel that, but then you get Growing Pains where you see like the backside of it and how like when you're alone, it's a different situation to when you're in front of someone else, and like just seeing that immediately after it like brings the whole thing together. So there's a lot of details that we need to get into, but on the whole, I'll say like I'm very impressed by these episodes and the relatability of these situations, which happens to a lot of us. But also, like at the same time, it's being specific about certain things, as Maddie alluded to, with childhood abuse, childhood trauma. Like it feels like it's gonna dive into that. So,
can I just say something really quick? You made me remember something about my initial thoughts. Is that I really love, because like at the beginning of Steven Universe Future, I thought the pink stuff was something wrong with the gem. Like it had to do with his emotions, but it had something to do with like inherently about the gem. And this just clearly says, no, this is about something that happened to Steven. This is happening because of something that happened to Steven, and has nothing really to do with like something wrong with how the gem is interacting with him. This is clearly just about his trauma, and I really appreciate them clearly stating that.
I love that too, because up until this point, I thought this was like a weird new power that he got from his mom, but it literally is just his body reacting to trauma the way it's always reacted to trauma. And it's such a much more satisfying reason.
Yeah, and it makes sense, because like I think that's something that's not talked about a lot, even beyond, because like we don't talk about like mental health a lot in a lot of this climate. I think a lot of people our age talk about it a lot more. But a big part that's not talked about is that there is a physical response when you have a traumatic reaction to something. Mm-hmm. It's just not very visible to a lot of people. But to you, when you're having that traumatic response, it is the world to you. And I think that this very clearly says, it is very clearly getting that across well.
Yeah. There's a lot of different angles to hit at. I know, Maddie, you said you wanted to focus specifically on something near the end, but
I mean, like, I don't know if we can start there though, because like all this episode, like, okay. I feel like these episodes specifically, we need to like build up to it.
Yeah, let's start at the beginning.
Okay, we want to do this chronologically. That's fine. So we begin with this being framed as a Connie Steven episode because we've been waiting for them to do cute stuff together. So they're doing their video chatting and all, and Connie's planning to go to University of Jayhawk, which is, I guess, this world's version of University of Kansas, Rock Chalk Jayhawk. There's sports has been canceled in real life. Okay, I need to get my sports connection somewhere in here. But she's studying political science because she wants to be president, as alluded to in the earlier seasons. From the very beginning, you notice something's up with Steven when he's like dangling the brochure, like, "Hey, you want to come get the brochure?" And the classic, "Let me know when you want to hang," which is, like in texting, you say that, we're like, "Come on, I need to see you, I need to see you." But so Steven is already a bit desperate at this point about wanting to see Connie. And we also see him sinking into the bed already. Yeah, any thoughts about this opening sequence in terms of like
I think
setting
this
up?
definitely very clearly set up everything.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Sorry, were you talking to Michelle? I'm sorry.
No, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
I didn't cut you off. I'm sorry.
Now I'll say from here, Steven goes to Garnet for advice. Garnet splits up because story reasons, and so we get this whole advice thing for Sapphire and Ruby. I'll say that usually I am quick to complain about people giving bad advice to further a story, but at the same time, like, these are the characters. This is exactly how they would act.
Also,
So,
they're not.
Yeah,
They
they're
don't
so
think.
in love they fuse forever, mostly, except for sometimes. Like, they're, of course, like, it makes so much sense to me. Like, I was a little curious if Sapphire was going to be the one to be like, "Oh, no, that's crazy." But the fact that she was also on board with the proposal, I was like, "Oh, man, these freaking gay, tiny beings, like, of course, like, they'd be like, 'Oh, yes, more love? Absolutely, go for it.'"
Yeah. And not really related to the main story, but that scene where like Sapphire is like doing the whole like, "Oh, well, you need this factor and this factor and this factor," and then the ocean washes it away,
Yeah.
and she uses that like, "That's how love works. You don't get to predict."
I think that this whole,
That was a very nice scene.
Yeah, no, and I think that like that for the whole first episode is kind of like that scene. It's all this big setup to be about love, like Steven Universe always is, and then it's like, no, but sometimes you have to think about yourself first before love. Like there's something that comes before you can love other people, and that's loving yourself and understanding yourself. And the show's like, "Hey, Steven, you're not doing that."
Well, not only that, it's like Steven in the moment isn't considering how Connie could react to something this big being sort of sprung on her.
Yeah.
Like, it really sticks out to me when he's talking to her through the window. He's like, "Don't worry, this will only take 15 minutes. I'm like, "Bro.
That's not how any of this
15
works.
minutes? Like, that's not enough time to do this well."
Because again, he doesn't get how this works. He thinks that they're gonna get engaged and then they're gonna fuse, and then Connie will go straight back to like studying as Stevani. And I think that's like how he thinks this will work.
Well, absolutely, but like again, it's just like it's like the little details, like it's the little details like that that just sets us up for everything to go wrong.
It really does.
Yeah. And I'll say also, like, I think that this is a side effect of us not seeing enough of the main crystal gems, but it is notable that we're seeing Ruby and Sapphire separate a little bit more than they used to be before the whole marriage thing. So, something to keep in mind that Steven did not in this moment. But after consulting with Ruby and Sapphire, he goes through with this. There's like a whole happy dancing montage around the town.
It's very creepy.
That's when I started to get really scared, honestly, was when he was singing in the montage. I was like, "Steven, you're too happy. Don't you know what show you're in?"
Yeah.
Oh, it's gonna get bad.
Now, I'll say, Steven really turns on the charm here. Connie is blushing from the moment she gets asked out for the walk.
Yeah.
They do the whole, like, "Hey, this is where I met you," like, and the picnic. It's just a lot. I mean, Connie, like, literally says at some point out loud, like, "This is so cute." Like, so any of us who've been shipping Converse for a while, I think this is like the peak.
Well, it is the peak. Like, and I don't ship Converse, but I noticed all, like, there's the juice boxes from Indirect Kiss. You got Jan Buds. You got the freaking, yeah, that is exactly where they met, by that rock. And, like, even the glow bracelet that he also has in the fridge. It's like, oh my god, literally all the callbacks.
Yeah, look, the timing was definitely off, but the method was perfect.
The method was perfect.
And we have this very sweet love song. I didn't really get much of the lyrics. I mean, the main thing is like I'd rather be me with you, which, as we talked about last podcast, is not exactly the healthy way to be going about this.
I thought it was interesting that when Steven was talking to Ruby, he was saying, like, Connie has so much direction and is so sure where she wants to go in life. And I don't have any of that clarity. But when I'm Stevani, I feel so confident to take on anything. And again, I felt like that was another kind of like red flag. It's like, well, Steven, if you just want to be Stevani because like, you're kind of taking in maybe some of Connie's confidence in what she wants to do as like kind of a failsafe for not knowing what you want to do. That's not a good enough reason to get married. I mean,
Yeah, yeah. And in general, this entire thing is looking at rejection when you think that you're at a different spot in the relationship than somebody else thinks. And that's always a complicated thing to deal with, right? Like, especially when you're the less mature person. Like, I think it's safe to say, like, Steven is not exactly in the same mental stability that Connie is, right? So,
yeah.
So Steven having to deal with the consequences of getting it in his face that like, no, we're not at that stage yet is, it's interesting to see the consequences of that, since that is something that has happened.
I mean, it is interesting, and also I was kind of shook that Connie, like, she kind of lets him down really gracefully, but she also says like, "Look, this isn't the right time. Don't worry." And as soon as she said "don't worry," I was like, "Oh my God, Connie's gonna marry Steven." She's basically saying like, "Yo, I'm so sure we're gonna be with each other. You don't need to do this now. Like, give it 10 years." And we'll be in a better life place to do this right. And like, honestly, that is the best vote of confidence you could hear from somebody. And so I'm just like, wow. Like, yeah, Connie has her life plan figured out, and that includes Steven, clearly.
Yeah, although I wonder if the answer would be very similar, even if she wasn't 100% sure. Like, she just seems like the kind of person who'd be like, "Look, like right now, it's not the time to be projecting our futures all the way there, you know." And
Yeah, but she doesn't end it there. Like, it seems like she has this confidence that like it's so much of a non-issue. Steven shouldn't be worried about it. Like, that's how sure she's seen. She like doesn't even feel the need to really get there, like, talk about it really even yet, which I think they should talk about it. But I don't know, I was just so shook by Connie's like confidence that they were gonna be together later. I was like, yo, I mean, that would put me at ease, but I'm not Steven, and Steven wants to get married for all the wrong reasons. So I mean, there you go.
Yeah, in summary, Connie is a saint for handling this as gracefully
Yes.
as she did. Although the initial "what" and like Steven invoking Stevani was also very relatable. Because like honestly, who?
They're 16. She does say like, we're awfully young, like, to be talking about this right now.
Yeah, yeah. But they give their hugs, and they're all like still their eyes, I think, are all like shimmery and
Especially Connie,
lovey dovey during this entire scene, just like assure you that there's nothing bad going on. Yeah, and they kind of gives a goodbye hug, and they leave off with Lion.
I mean, I do appreciate that Steven, like, when her alarm goes off and she's like, no, like, this is an emergency. Like, not like an emergency, but, like, this is a crisis for Steven, who I do care about. I want to make time for you. And Steven's kind of like, no, like, I know how important studying is to you. Like, I don't want to keep you from that. Which, like, again, is considerate, but also, I think the biggest reason, like, Steven clearly isn't ready to get married is the fact that, like, Connie asks him if he's okay and if anything's wrong, and he just like straight up lies. And if you can't be honest with like the person you want to marry, you probably shouldn't marry them yet.
Yeah, and also it's another part of the pattern of him putting off his feelings. Like no, you need to leave. There's no time right now. You gotta go. Like,
yeah, it's a way to push her away from the truth, like more than anything. Being like, oh no, go back and study. Don't worry about me. basically.
We went through the whole Connie Stephen no part. Maddie, would you like to give your thoughts on this whole scene here?
I loved how loving and how much care there was in it. Like, I loved how much, I love the song. The song was, and I really love just seeing Connie, like, Connie does care for Steven, and Connie gets that Steven doesn't get a lot of human stuff because he grew up weird. Really weird. And you can tell by the way that this happened that Connie's not, like, mad at Steven for this. She's just confused and taken aback. And she feels like she has to explain to Steven, like, hey, we're young. And I just, like, it went so much better than I was expecting. But then Steven still has all this stuff to work through. And so he still has to work through it. And I don't know. The no itself went really well, all things considered.
I agree. It went really well. We were saying Connie handled it very gracefully.
and Connie didn't even like break up with him or anything.
Yeah, she's like, just wait. She's like, yo, just wait. It's gonna happen, basically. Just wait like 10 years.
She's like, take a breath. I'm not leaving you.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just so nice and so caring and just like, hey, you don't get what's going on here, but I'm still here with you. And that really followed up in the next episode when she continued to care for him.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that. Like, I appreciate that they can show that you can say no to something, no to something that your partner wants, while still loving and caring for them. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Relationship goals.
I mean, like, also this episode, I don't think we talked about it yet, but they're together, I guess. I guess we just never had that.
Well, yeah, I've been working under that assumption since the movie or whatever.
I mean, I think since the movie, but even before that.
Yeah, I mean, like, we talked about how, like, neither of them are talking about it, though.
I would think that they probably should really talk about it. Like, this might be the first time they've actually really talked about it. It wasn't a lot of talking, to be honest.
It was, but I mean, like, Connie is so mature, and I love her so much.
Yeah. This episode has an epilogue of Steven waking up to tears with Garnet by their side. There's a really nice line here where she says, like, your soulmate is a compliment, not a missing piece. Which is an important contrast to draw. Oh, I didn't know if either of you wanted to jump in on that.
Well, I mean, it's just, yeah, so again, Steven Universe Future is very not subtle, but I think in the best way possible a lot of times when it comes to just nailing home what they want to say.
Like, I think that this is something that a lot of people need to hear. And it's like, I'm not saying, like, I need to hear this, like, I know this. But it's like, just hearing it outright is important, though. Like...
Well, and it's something that often you get from experience, but some people maybe shouldn't have that experience and just have the knowledge beforehand.
And, I mean, like, but I also...
It's like actively working against so much of like problematic media for centuries has been telling us that like a person's supposed to complete you and they're the only other thing that matters and that's the most important relationship you should ever have.
And I think that it's important that Garnet doesn't say that you can't be a better person with the other person. Like you can be better when you're with your partner. You can be like an ideal version of yourself or something. But it's important that you're still functional, that you're still a person. You understand how to care for yourself. And I think that those two worlds can exist together. And Garnet doesn't say that they can't. And I think that's also important.
She also kind of like points out that like another person cannot fix you or fix your problems for you. Like I love, like, I forget exactly how she worded it. She's basically like, yo, like, you're still, like, you can't, like, whatever's going on with you, it's still going to be going on, even if you did get married. And you can see how shook Steven is, like, realizing that.
He thinks that it's going to change.
That being with Connie isn't going to fix all the trauma he has going on for himself. But that's the truth. That's the hard work, but it's the truth.
And it's very surprising to see this in a kid's show. And I think that's, we don't say kid's show very often, but a show that's, like, a show that kids will watch. Like, kids will be watching this show and they will see this, and I think that's important.
Right. And also we just get a quick look at Mean Steven, where he, like, gets sort of angry at Garnet with, like, making it look easy or whatever. And I mean, it's a natural thing of deflecting, but it's just I felt a little hurt seeing that.
Yeah, Sam. Plus, like, the fact that Steven, like, when he lays down, he's there till, like, night. Like, he was so sad he stayed on the beach, like, for hours and hours and hours. It was just like, ooh, Steven, you are not handling this well.
I also think this scene sets up a lot that's going to come on in the next episode, where it's like, this is the setup, but this is like the setup for the big hit next episode, where it's like, I think when you're a kid, you think that there's going to be a point when you're an adult. There's a point when you think that you're going to be better than something that's wrong in your life. And unfortunately, that's just not true. Even if something happened to you that wasn't fair, even if something happened to you that was bad, as what happened to Steven, it doesn't just get better. There isn't just some magic fix, and that sucks. But bad things happen to good people sometimes, and I think that's also what Steven's grappling with right now.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think he partially thinks that he's been good, so it should be good, the world he's in. And unfortunately, that's just not how it works.
Yeah, and this is jumping ahead, but directly related to what you said. Like in Growing Pains, there's the lines that as he's venting to Greg while he's losing control, he uses lines that come up a lot, like "I shouldn't be feeling like this," or like "This isn't supposed to be." So like, you have these expectations for yourself, of like what you're supposed to feel like in certain situations, and when that doesn't happen, that just it fuels your anger at yourself even more, and then it becomes the cycle. And so we're seeing that kind of bubble up from the end of Together Forever into Growing Pains. But Growing Pains begins with a bit of a light note. Dogcopter is gay.
Yes! Oh my gosh! I like, he's a dogcopter, but good for him. He's getting married.
We're using the movie title "I Now Pronounce You Man and Wolf," which, there's no man involved here if they're both dogs, right? But like,
I think that was just doesn't feel like we're gay.
It's like a man dog and a wolf dog, I guess.
A wolf dog.
Yeah. See, this is what you get when a cat person comes on.
Oh my god.
Well, when is Cookie Cat gonna be gay? That's a real question.
Man, that's a good question.
Oh, Cookie Cat left his family that were all gay. That's obviously it.
We'll finally get the backstory on that. But then we are cut to Steven just like eating away his feelings with ice cream. Like, everyone's getting married but me.
That killed me. I'm like, you're 16, but like, I feel you, buddy.
Well, again, this is like media tells you what you're supposed to be doing, and when you gotta fight against it.
I'm at a point in my life. You two know this. I'm at a point in my life where I see marriage and I'm just like, I'm okay. I'm okay right now.
I mean, I feel like most of us are, but at the same, at least here in this room are. But at the same time, like, in the back of your mind, like, that is what everyone shows as the end. So it's hard to fight against that.
Oh, it is. Like, everything
like
ends. Like, there's that thing where they talk about how, like, everything needs to end with either a wedding or a funeral. And, like, that's a trope because it's real. A lot of movies and TV shows end with a wedding or a funeral, but like one of those is a wedding, and it's just like weddings aren't like the end all be all. Marriage isn't the end all be all of a relationship. And I think this is important. Like, I think Connie's showing that there's a lot that happens before you get married and a lot that happens after with Garnet. And it's just, and I think that's really important to show.
I was going to say that the fact that Ruby and Sapphire spend the episode apart kind of should be proving to Steven that they still both are separate people and have separate interests, even if they're married and like the most gay and in love gems on the whole show.
Right.
They're literally joined at the hip, and but they can still do stuff on their own.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But Steven is having these conflicting feelings, and he can't call the gems because story reasons, and he can't call Connie because he's very awkward all of a sudden. Tries calling Greg. Greg is busy doing his own thing, which good for him. He's being a manager, and so finally Connie calls him, and they tell him to see a doctor because he's starting to freak out. The body's beginning to lose control. And we have Priyanka back, guys. Connie's mom finally has a role again.
Remembered her first name.
Priyanka is a queen, okay? And it's been a crime that she's not
Alex,
showed up.
Did you have to look it up?
No, I did not.
He remembered all the way from season 2 what her name was.
Come on, like Doug got an episode named after him. How did Priyanka not get an episode until now?
Priyanka, Mr. Greg is just a little snappier, unfortunately.
Yeah, it is.
That easy name shouldn't get a preferential treatment.
I know they shouldn't, Alex, but I'm just saying that's how titles work.
I mean, Bismuth's name was Bismuth. It's not like Bismuth and Priyanka are on a similar level.
Yeah, but Priyanka is great in this episode, and we'll get into why. But it begins with her doing the normal test. By the way, Nightmare Hospital, she's advanced a lot since then, because back then she didn't even care what gems were. She kind of just let those gem monstrosities wander up. But now she's done her research. She's X-rayed Pearl and Amethyst and Garnet. It's great.
He takes it very much in stride the whole time, and I was super impressed by her candor. I was like, wow, she's really holding it together fine.
Yeah.
I think because in Nightmare Hospital, she just didn't believe Connie that this was real.
She thought it was a normal patient.
Yeah, no, it wasn't that she was ever against the idea, it's that she's literally no, there's not magic.
Exactly.
Which I know the gems are space science stuff, but I mean, they're magic. Let's be honest here.
City in general is always so blasé about gem stuff. That's part of what's so amazing about it.
It really is.
Yeah, but then we get after this montage of doing tests and stuff. We get to a point where she displays the human skeleton and Steven's skeleton. And there's this very interesting moment where she talks about how he has a bunch of fractures. They naturally heal themselves because of gem powers. So he doesn't really have the physical trauma, but emotional trauma happens at the same time. And that might be a reason why this is happening to you. And I think it's in the same place where she mentions the cortisol that runs through your brain when you're going through stressful situations. And then Steven goes through this whole thing of recounting season 1.
But only season 1. There's a lot more
season 1. But
I know. He gets cut off that was only the beginning. But that entire scene is just wow in terms of
they use gems, which are this, because gems have been multiple times saying when they're reforming, your mental state affects what your form will be when you reform and things like that. But the thing is that Steven has purposely been, one, avoiding reforming, avoiding that because he wants to be human. He wants to do that, so it doesn't work like that for him. And two, the gems don't have this problem. They come out, they're not adults when they come out, but their childhood phase is a lot more different than other people. So we're stuck with this. The only person I think we could really blame here is Greg. But, which I think is a different discussion altogether. But it's just really interesting to see them use this really sci-fi device to get across something very real. I was talking about earlier, where they show this this mental thing can really have a physical effect on people.
Yeah.
Just because it's mentally taxing doesn't mean your body doesn't get hurt by that.
Yeah, I'll just say, when we see Steven's x-rays, I was unprepared for how strongly I was going to be upset by that. Probably because Steven's such a cute little cartoon child most of the time. But it's oh my god, here is a roadmap of all the physical pain he endured that is with him forever, even if it's healed. Those cracks, like those fracture lines will always be there, and it's a
Yeah.
roadmap of that trauma. And I was just like, oh my god, this is so real. Oh, Steven, poor kid.
Are we doing this now? Is this it now? Like, are we here?
There's also like a line that Priyanka says where like the body can end up dealing with minor issues the same way that you've always been handling life-threatening issues, and that's also a big thing with trauma where like you might end up having triggers that are small to the eye of the outsider, but because of the fact that they come from much more threatening events earlier in your life, that's why they have that effect. And so it's also interesting to talk about that, how like stuff that doesn't seem as consequential to someone from the outside, but that's the reason that somebody can react that way. And I've never seen it even said that way in a show before, like just like the connection between the two things.
It's really something that you hear in therapy, and it's like, I just want to say for listeners that like when you see like stuff for trigger warnings, this is why, because some things bring up memories, and not maybe even like actual memories, like what they call it sometimes in therapy is they call them emotional flashbacks, where someone says something and they're not meaning to hurt you, but they say something and it directly in your brain connects a dot between where you are now and where you were when you got hurt. And all of a sudden your brain goes, oh, we're here again. And your brain, all it can do is it has experience with this reaction, with this thing that it's hearing or being done to it. And it knows that the best way to react is to have a much more a much crazier response than someone who isn't traumatized by that thing would. And it's very succinctly described here, and it explains why, like, if you are the person that sees like trigger warnings and it's like kind of crazy, like this is why they're important. People do have these reactions. These are legitimate and valid, and they suck.
Yeah, and in this particular case, it's represented by Steven losing control of his body.
Yeah,
and he does that first, like thinking about Connie, and then when Connie shows up, it even goes more out of control, and he finally like shouts out loud, like, "I don't want to see you right now," which is so like it was a bit of a shock.
Yeah, and I think the important thing for this is, like, this makes kind of some amount of sense because we're in a really stressful situation for Steven. But I think that if we go back in Steven Universe Future and watch through it and see all the times he goes pink, it's really gonna hurt. Because we're gonna know for a fact that these are actually triggers. These are actually traumatic things that are happening to him each and every time. Like, the last one we saw was Peridot, right? We saw it happen.
He got pink a little bit there, and he also got pink in Jasper, I believe.
Yeah, no, and when Sadie was with Shep. And, like, all of these moments, except for Jasper maybe, are very minor. Like, they're not, like, big things. But you can see that they're hurting Steven in almost the same way they are now. It's just now Steven has nowhere to put all this. There's no one here to rein him in anymore. He doesn't feel the need to because he's lost. And I just can't express how much this affected me. Because, like, I see so much of myself in this stuff that Steven's talking about.
Well, and he puts all this into words once Greg shows up. By the way, that moment where where Steven is able to get out a thank you to Connie, and Connie's like turns her head around slightly, and it's like, just tell me when you need me.
Very animated.
It's very sweet.
It's very sweet, but also you can see that like this is also affecting their relationship in a new, not so good way, because him having this side of him is, like, you know, not that it like necessarily complicates things, but like it's kind of scary if you're a human and your friend / boyfriend, whatever, can turn into a giant pink person and also doesn't want to see you.
And like, even if like they're not a crazy gem person, like if you have a partner who has trauma or has something like Steven's having, but not in the crazy gem sense, it affects you. Even if you know that that person is not to blame for it, even if you know that this person's good and nice and, like, you love them, it still affects you, and it's still part of your life now that you know your partner has this trauma, and it's difficult. it affects everyone around you when you have these things. Everyone who loves you is affected, and it sucks. And I think they're showing that really well. I'm just really stunned at how easily they got across this very complicated subject.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this culminates in Stephen venting to Greg in this scene. The line, "How do I live life if it always feels like I'm about to die?" is
Oh God, Alex.
2020 is the year for this.
I mean, like, but it's not even that. Like, sorry, I wasn't trying to dismiss your point. Sorry, Michelle.
It's fine.
No, but I assume, Alex, you're having some similar, like, childhood. Like, we have similar experiences, and I won't talk too much about you, obviously, but I've hinted at that I have childhood abuse, and it has led to me having every single day feeling like this way that Steven mentions. It's scary. Every day is scary. Every little thing that happens feels like the end of a friendship or the end of a thing that's going to be with me, that I want to be in my life. And it's scary and it sucks. And all you want is for it to be over. All you want is to be better. All you want is for your brain to just understand that you're not in that really bad situation anymore. And everything Steven's going through is a direct allegory to that. Like, I think it's very, like, not subtle, but just in case anyone admits that, that's exactly what this Steven's going through and exactly what the show's trying to say Steven's going through. Even if it wasn't the gems that hurt him, he was abused, or like the crystal gems, I mean. Obviously gems hurt him, but I mean, he was hurt and abused as a child, mentally and physically, and even though he got through it and he won, that's going to affect him for the rest of his life. And because it wasn't one big moment, because it wasn't just one traumatic experience, every single time anything like this happens again, he will feel like this, no matter what he does. He will learn coping strategies. He will learn how to be better in, like, public and be better about controlling this reaction. But he will feel this probably for the rest of his life. And that is depressing, and it feels awful, and it's not something light or I ever expected Steven Universe to talk about.
Okay,
Well,
I want to talk about something for a second, though. Like, I hear all that, and I agree to an extent, Maddie, but also
No, go ahead.
One of the things that Priyanka said that really I thought was super interesting, and again, gives us so much insight into what this pink power is that she's saying, like, so Stephen basically doesn't have a normal way to react to stressful situations in like the same degree that they actually are. Like, I'd never considered the fact that because a lot, if not all of Steven's early stressors were pretty much life or death, like, attacks, that he would put everything else that would happen later on the same magnitude.
Yeah.
So I feel like when you mentioned, oh, like, he's gonna have ways to manage, like, I think maybe that's what the back half of the season might be, is Steven figuring out how to cope with this in a more, like, mollified, like, quote unquote healthy, manageable way to, like, everyday situational stress.
I'm.
He just doesn't know how to do that.
Which thing are you disagreeing with for me, Michelle? I'm sorry. I'm just misunderstanding. I'm not sure I understand, because I think I said that. I might not have said it clearly. I'm sorry.
Oh, I guess I'm just saying, like, that I'm seeing it more as a positive that he hopefully will find ways to manage this stress in relation to the magnitude, versus, like, it being genuinely upsetting that he will never ever fully get past the things that happened to him. You know?
What I'm saying is, this is the moment he's in. I'm saying he's at this moment where he has to understand that, like, this is something he's going to have to learn to cope with, because it's going to be in the background. It's going to be something he's going to have to cope with for his whole life. And right now in the episode we're in, it is this big, daunting, negative thing. And there are times in the future where he won't think about it, even on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, but it will be part of his life. And that's sad, I think, in a lot of ways. It means he can start moving forward this episode. This episode means he can start on the path to recovery, and that's great. And that's, like, I'm really happy for him. But it is not easy to see a 16-year-old dealing with this kind of trauma, and for it to feel so real. And it's really painful because this is a kid who has a lot of life ahead of him. And that is depressing.
I mean, I guess it's a glass half empty, glass half full.
I think we're just coming at it from different directions, I guess.
Yeah, I think there's a line between, we know that the source of the trauma never goes away, and it is a lifelong process of dealing with it, but also that we lay out here what he needs to do in order to make it a positive experience as much as he can, even if it never goes away fully, right? And my personal experience connecting with this episode is that for Stephen mentions at the beginning of that event, like it always felt like the end of the world to me. Like in this show, we've seen that like he's dealing with like diamonds and galactic stuff. But also, like, even to a lesser extent, like, let's say you're raised in a household that teaches you that the apocalypse is always at your doorstep, and you have to live your life as if that is going to happen, and to limit your connections to the outside world as a result. And let's say that you suddenly are in a new situation where you're now all alone and you have to try to figure out how to live life like a normal person. And and since you're raised with that mindset, simple things like constructing friendships and then losing friendships affects you in a way that that if you dealt with it healthily, it might not be as affecting as it is if you've always lived with the mindset of any friend that you have is precious, and losing it will be the end of the world to you. So, like, I feel like, I mean, this is a weird example, but it's like with like a Wii remote that if you don't have it calibrated, it kind of just like moves all over the place, and with like the lightest little movement, and like you need to like put it in calibration. And for some people, when you lived your entire life in a certain environment and then you push yourself into a healthier one, it does take a while to calibrate yourself to what is the healthy reactions to
and
things.
It's always longer than I think people on the outside and the person who's going through it think it will take. It's because you're always, because the thing is, when you're not calibrated, like using this analogy, like you don't know what calibrated means. You don't know where the point you're supposed to be at is. You don't know what centered is. And so every day...
Like using the example of the show, right? Like Steven immediately jumps to proposing because it's like, well, sure, that's
closer to the calibrated point.
Yeah, and so and then when that doesn't work, he's like, okay, well, everything is lost. Like, you kind of just react in extremes, and it takes a bit to get to the point where you are able to handle it in a healthier way. And I think that Priyanka's spiel in this episode does a good job at laying that out. And just hearing Stephen put this into words is very reaffirming in terms of like, for a long time, like, I mean, we all have different kinds of abuse, but I think Steven Universe does a good job of doing it in a way where like you can connect to it from different angles. And this final monologue here of a plea for help to Greg kind of seals it in terms of like the different ways that it affects you.
Yeah, and I don't know if we're gonna go here. Speaking of Greg, because one thing that this show, what'd you say?
Well, just to like, if we're gonna go into Greg, like he listens out in this venting, and then we cut to his bedroom where he listens to him a little bit more. The main thing that I picked up out of like what Greg says is that near the end he like remembers to tell him like, look, it's okay to be making these wrong decisions. Don't beat yourself up about that, which is something I recall a lot here from therapy, where like you begin blaming yourself for the bad decisions. Like, I should have done these things differently, and like someone has to be there to be like, no, like this is part of the learning process. So like that was one positive thing I got from Greg. But what else did you want to say about him?
I was gonna say that this show kind of, I think for good reason, because this is still like this is one of the points where they stayed in allegory, because they kind of avoided the idea of talking about parental abuse. I think like they avoided fully like talking about because all of the sources of Steven's trauma are pretty esoteric. They're like a mindless it's the mindless homeworld did this to him. You know what I mean? Like, there isn't a person that did things to him that triggers him. I think that there would be some of the gems that might have a bigger reaction from him, but there wasn't ever someone in his life, like a parent, who is there all the time to do these things to him, which makes it a little different than some forms of childhood abuse. And I think the only place that we even come close to that is with Greg, and Greg is a loving father, and he loves Steven so much, and he wants the world for Steven. But that doesn't mean he doesn't make mistakes. Doesn't mean that he doesn't mess up and give Steven things or not give Steven things that he desperately needs. And I think they successfully showed how a parent who is loving and caring can put their child into a situation where they can get abused. Greg is not a bad person, but I think you could say he's a bad parent, and he is partially to blame for the things that happened to Steven. Not like in the sense of like he never brought Steven in for a doctor exam. He never gave Steven some of the physical things he needed, because Steven doesn't know how school works. He doesn't know how marriage works. Steven's working on an axis around people that's so different that he doesn't understand humans. And that's Greg's responsibility, because he is Steven's human parent. And that, I'm not trying to say that Greg actively or maliciously hurt Steven, but unfortunately, we really can point to Greg when we think about why Steven has this inability to connect with humans his age. Like, he just doesn't know how they work. And that's frustrating because there's no real point. It's frustrating because it gets gray, and we want it to be black and white, especially in situations like this. And it just is very frustrating. And it's frustrating for Steven, I'm sure, because he has to wrestle with this personally. And it's just, I'm not sure how to end this thought, but that's definitely what's going through my head when I'm thinking about Greg in this episode.
So, I mean, I'll just say briefly, like, I agree with Maddie that in general, the show portrays Greg as like loving whenever he has interactions with Steven, but there is the overarching thing of, well, he doesn't exactly have a lasting presence in the life. But so far, at least, we haven't really addressed that.
I will say, do you want to say something, Alex? I'm sorry.
That talking about this a little bit, as well as like bringing up like Priyanka, like. They make a point to do the line like, I need to talk to your father about that. So it does feel like, and the fact that we end on this Stephen Greg thing, and I should let you know that the next episode title is Mr. Universe.
It could be Steven. I mean, he's also a universe.
It could be. We could see Steven ascend to manhood. I do think that we are going to talk about this if we're going down this line of trauma, because it is important to deal with it from different angles. Like, we did one angle in this episode, and I think that there's a possibility that Steven maybe takes Greg to task or something, if that's the direction we want to go down with regards to examining Greg. But like, the problem is I like Greg.
And that, I think that's still valid. I think you're allowed to like Greg and still be like, he messed up.
Yeah.
I mean, who hasn't messed up though? I mean, the gems.
Like, the thing is,
their best, but they're gems.
Greg is technically the person who is responsible for teaching Steven how to be a person, because Steven's his son, and I think that Greg has failed in doing that.
For the sake of completeness, I would also like to point out, like, we haven't really talked about the crystal gems themselves role in this.
I think we're saying that for the last couple episodes.
Yeah. I'm just saying, like, again, like, if this is the path we're going on, which, by the way, bull way to end the show. Like, let's look at all the people who have wronged our boy Steven from the very beginning of the show. But if we decide to do that, I mean, the crystal gems are also like they're the ones charged with this, and they didn't really do their homework. They kind of just went on the fly and allowed this physical trauma to develop.
Like, they are his primary caregiver.
I think that we could get to the point where Greg confronts the crystal gems and is like, you didn't want me to be in his life to the extent I wanted to be. This is your fault. And I think we could
but
have
also
that.
Greg kind of let them have that control.
Yeah, he did. I'm not saying that he's
Well,
in the
we're
right
talking
to say that.
possibilities. We're talking.
Yeah,
I'm
we're
saying that
talking
he could-
possibilities. Okay, I want to talk about a positive thing that this episode did.
I'm sorry. I mean, like, there's a lot of great stuff in this episode. I'm sorry.
I found it really interesting that Steven has this habit of pushing people away and just like assuring them everything's fine. But I think the fact that, you know, Connie knew Steven was not okay after the beach, so like calls him up specifically to be like, I'm worried about you. And then immediately like tells him like, yo, you need medical like attention after she sees him transforming is really good. The fact that she calls Greg because she's like, okay, maybe like he doesn't want to see me or he like can't talk to me about this problem, but I bet he will talk to his dad, I think is pretty cool. And the fact that like when Steven initially calls Greg does say like, do you want us to like come swing by like as we drive through Delmarva? And Steven's like, no, everything's cool. Like, I think this show's also made it clear that like these people like Connie and Greg, they're trying to reach out to Steven and he keeps pushing them away. But despite that, they help him anyway. And they come to him because that is hard to do sometimes when you're struggling to like accept any help. And the fact that like, sometimes your friends just end up being more assertively like trying to give you help even if you push it away and don't ask for that, and it being actually a good thing for you, I think is kind of like a nice thing to highlight.
I think I agree with everything you're saying, and I agree that Steven is, and like, but here's the thing, like, Steven is quote unquote to blame for pushing people away, but again, he's a kid.
No,
and
I'm
that's
not.
Like,
I'm not.
No, I'm not saying you're saying that, Michelle. I agree with you. I know you're not saying that, and I'm saying all that's true, and I think all the stuff I'm saying is true, and that's difficult to juggle. But I agree that like everyone in his life is so caring, and they want him to be better, and they clearly don't want to hurt him, and that's great. He has a support network a lot of people don't have.
Well, I mean, that's something that Mrs. Maheshwaran brings up too. She's like, sometimes, especially if your support network is weakened and you can't rely on it like you usually can, like this kind of stress gets more drastic, which I think is a huge part of why we're seeing this accumulate now in future when everyone's leaving at the same time in his life. Like, this is his rock bottom because he doesn't have everyone there to help him through this, or at least he doesn't feel like he does. And that's such a good insight that she has into what's going on with him.
And as he mentions at the end here, I mean, well, he mentions in both episodes, right? Like, a big part of it is just he doesn't know where to go next. Like, he's been in this one role for as long as he can remember since season 1. So that now trying to find a new role is part of why he's struggling with this, and also he's not used to accepting this kind of help from other people. So that's an adjustment he has to make as well. And we'll see how this ends up going if we're going to continue on the down spiral. If this is the beginning of an improvement, we'll end up seeing in these next couple of episodes.
I'm really interested to see where they go, because like this is kind of like the big question with abuse, because it's like, hey, the thing happened to you, it became your whole life, because it just has to be your whole life, and then you get out of it, and it's like, oh, I'm a person separate from this bad thing that happened, but you still feel like you're in that bad thing, and it's just, how do you move forward? And I don't think there is a satisfying answer, but I don't know how you turn that into a satisfying TV conclusion, because there isn't really a satisfying answer, I don't think.
Yeah, we'll see how they handle moving forward, which has been the thesis of this entire Steven Universe Future thing. So we'll be back next week to discuss Mr. Universe and
hopefully
Fragments.
Less sad.
I'm not gonna hedge my bets on that.
Oh man,
I I feel like we'll be continuing our at the very least we'll be continuing our examining of Steven's psyche and the different angles that it could go. But until we are back to that, you can find the info on this podcast at overlyanimated.com. You can join us on Discord if you want to chat with us about this episode or other animated shows we cover at overlyanimated.com/Discord. You can support us via Patreon at patreon.com/overlyanimated. Thanks to all of our current patrons, especially our patron of the podcast, Damien, aka Diamond Day. And thanks to our Patreon executive producers, Ryan, Steve, Beatrice, Hugh, Michael, and Needle. But yeah, we'll be back later to talk the next Steven Universe episodes. And that's March 20 and March 27, the series finale. So it's amazing that we're like at this point, and yet there's only like 6 episodes left somehow.
Somehow.
Last week, 4 episodes?
Yep.
Yeah,
Last week
it
was
is.
a 4-part finale.
We're gonna die!
Yeah. So until then, when we figure out when Wormy shows up, talk to you later. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.